Quite an honor to be here. I will start by saying, as excited as I am to tell the story of CP Chem and of petrochemicals, I am probably a poor example of the risk management we preach, because what I have to say I'm enthused about, but it's not worth taking a safety risk. So I would impart everybody, as you think about it on the way home, make a good decision. Check out the weather, check out where the radar is headed. It's pretty bad out there. When I left, I thought it was all going to be to the north and the east. It's coming, from what I can tell. So I am here to share what we consider to be a very exciting story, both for the petrochemical industry and for CP Chem in particular. Talk a little bit about where CP Chem has been, what we've learned from that journey, what we're doing in the future, why we're excited about that, and some of the challenges that CP Chem and the petrochemical industry face going forward. So it's a lot to cover. I spent nearly 8 years as a project sponsor of our U.S. Gulf Coast petrochemical project. That was quite an incredible career experience for me to follow something literally from a bullet point on a PowerPoint slide to over $6 billion over 7 years later, to world-scale assets producing products to be used all over the world. I will say, though, as satisfying as that was, these are very challenging projects. They're hard. So we'll be sharing some of the things we learned later today. This is one of my favorite pictures from the project because it represents two of the themes that I think are so important. First is safety. These craft are coming out of a safety meeting in full safety gear, ready to work safely. And you get a sense of the challenges of safety when you have this many people, literally and figuratively working on top of each other each and every day out there. The second is to think about just the scale and the amount of people this picture represents, which is actually a small fraction. We had as many as 9,000 people on our two sites at a single time at one point. Each of those craft are making six figures for the most part, maybe more, given the overtime. So they're taking that home to their families, supporting their families, spending it in their communities. So I'm actually quite certain that the Baytown Buckies is quite sad to see us finish our cracker and maybe Exxon finish their cracker in Baytown, because I'm sure that was a boon for them. Let's see. So just a real quick overview of Chevron Phillips, or CP Chem. We're half owned by Chevron, half owned by Phillips, but we really operate as a very independent company. For the finance folks out there, we have $17 billion in assets and $12 billion in revenues. I prefer to think of it as 5,000 employees, making and selling products in 140 different countries all around the world. This is a picture of our new cracker that's in Baytown. Many of you are probably familiar with it since we built it essentially on I-10. So if you've been traveling there for the last several years, you got to see a cracker being built. We built similar sized in terms of scale polyethylene assets in Old Ocean, Texas, down by Sweeney or Lake Jackson, on the slightly less traveled State Route 35. When we started this project, our company was $9 billion in assets, and we spent over $6 billion on it. So that's quite a bet on Texas, quite a bet on the petrochemical industry, quite a bet on what was evolving at the time, a very embryonic oil and gas surge that we all now, 8 years later, see very clearly. Prior to that, all of our investment had been in the Middle East. We had 4 different projects there, and that had been the focus of our company, and that was the flight of our capital. So it is kind of fun to bring it all back to the U.S. I'm happy to say that we started up this cracker in March of last year. It very quickly got to full rates, and now we've proven that even though we built it for 1,500 KTA or 3.3 billion pounds a year, it's operating 15% above that, 1725 or about 3.9. So operated very well, operated very safely, and is one of the most energy efficient crackers in the world. We also built 2 polyethylene loops. One of the points that I like to make in case we have some of our customers here is how much our industry spends on off-plot logistics. Polyethylene, the producer delivers it to the consumer. So, part of our project we had to have built for us 2,700 rail cars, hopper cars, to put the polyethylene in. This is a picture at Old Ocean, and it's less than 1,500 cars. So you get a sense of just how big that is. But those two polyethylene loops are operating quite well. They're making high-tech polyethylene products that are being sold all over the world. As I mentioned earlier, these projects, have had very many challenging moments for us, and I'm going to share some of those lessons learned. But first, let's talk about what it gave us confidence to do, and that is, if you're looking at the newspapers over in late June and early July, we had 2 separate announcements of 2 additional mega projects of the same scale I just shared with you that we did in the Texas, in the Baytown and the Old Ocean areas. The first one is what we call U.S. Gulf Coast 2. That project is well along into FEED. The signing ceremony, you don't often get to have your CEO, have his work overlooked by the President of the United States, but that's the documents for a joint venture project that we're doing with Qatar Petroleum. In fact, both of these projects are joint ventures with Qatar Petroleum. And we've had 20 years of experience with 3 different projects in Qatar, built a very strong relationship with the Qataris, and we're very excited about both of these projects, one in the Gulf Coast and one in the state of Qatar. But these are heavy lifts and are very challenging projects to pull off, but we're confident that we can because we did learn a lot from our recent efforts. And so I'll share some of those lessons. I think first and foremost and most personal for me is a lesson around safety. As I said, when you have 5,000 people working on a site like that, it's a challenge. And the cracker project in particular did not start out well. We had a recordable incident rate, much higher than anything we had experienced in our corporation, much higher than what we had targeted, and it was a deep concern for us as that project started. The contractor said, hey, our workforce is inexperienced, maybe you have to expect, a higher injury rate. That was just something we couldn't accept. So the turning point was bringing in a company, a consultant called J&J, just a few guys. It wasn't this big army. You can't subcontract that to somebody. But they did ask management of the project and ourselves some important questions. How do you feel about your craft? Are they your problem? If that's how you think about it, you may want to rethink that, because who's going to build this facility for you? They need to be seen as your asset, and you need to invest in that asset. So we quickly realized we didn't really have a safety problem. We had a problem in leadership. And we had to change our perspective, that the craft couldn't be just numbers on a spreadsheet and an army that we deployed like a game. They were real people, and we had to connect with them. So we did a number of things. I'll share a few of those. I think first and foremost, we're starting with respecting that craft. We put together teams of craft, supported those teams, built around some of the safety elements that we were facing on the site. But probably the most important one was a life on site team, where they could give us feedback on things that were really distractions for them to work safely and to work productively. Things like porta potties. I think we were trying to save a little money by not emptying out the porta potties very frequently. Anybody who's ever used one or been to one in the heat of the summer can appreciate that that's not a good message to be sending to the people who are building your plant. So we quickly changed things like that. Another suggestion that JMJ gave us that wasn't intuitive to me, I will say, at first, but we were willing to give anything a try, was to greet all the craft every morning at the turnstile when they came in and shake their hand, wish them a good day. When we first started that, the craft was a little skeptical, might avert their eye, see if they could avoid you. But very quickly, it helped build that relationship. And starting the day on a positive note with some music in the background and some other things going on, maybe some handouts, a breakfast taco or something, was a good way to get the day started on the right foot. One of the things we found, and probably the biggest point of leverage in this exercise, were the foreman and general foreman. They were also inexperienced and really had very little exposure to supervisory training, how to be a supervisor, and virtually no exposure to how to be a leader. And so in 2 days of training, one done by the safety consultant, one done by the contractor, we really focused on leadership training, how to run a crew, how to do the tailgate meeting, how to look around at your crew and get people engaged, get people talking about what they saw the day before, what they expect today, and really build a sense of, within that crew, we're all brothers and sisters. We're going to look out for each other like we're brothers and sisters. And we're going to speak up if we see a problem. We're going to pause the work. We're going to protect each other. And when you have 5,000 people on a site, you need all 5,000 looking out for each other. That can't be a safety coach or a foreman. It's really got to be the people working together and to create that kind of culture. And remarkably, people really embrace that. They want that. They like it better when you can create that. So teaching foremen and general foremen how to create that atmosphere was one of the biggest steps forward we had. It is true the craft was inexperienced. There's a lot going on the Gulf Coast. The building resources were quite thin. And so we did have to step back and recognize that we were asking people to do things they weren't trained to do, and that was part of the reason they were getting hurt. So we retrained people and then validated those skills, because some of the rigging we were asking people to do was beyond what you get in an advanced rigging class. And yet, we were expecting them to do that without any training. And so we did that. You got stickers on your hard hat if you passed rigging 2-inch pipe or 6-inch pipe or 10-inch pipe, 30-inch pipe, could operate different machines. And one of the things that this helped with was it made it safe for people to say, hey, I can't do that because I haven't been trained on this. Because we had so many people hurt because they were trying to do something they hadn't been trained to do. And you have to make it safe for people to say, I don't know. It can be a pretty macho environment out there on a construction site, and it's hard for people to go that way. And finally, one of the things we found, even though we had well-staffed safety teams, they spent probably more than half their time fighting each other. The contractor had a team, CP Chem had a team, and when they weren't fighting each other, they felt their role was to be the police. To kind of hide in the bushes, take a picture, write somebody up, look, I saw you doing something unsafe. And we quickly realized that the end result of that was people quit working because that was the best way not to get caught doing something wrong. And of course, when you're trying to build a site with millions of man hours, that's going to take millions of man hours. That's not a very good thing either. So we retooled all that. We made one safety team that reported to the owner and really changed the role model from being auditors and police to your mission is to help all the workers on the site find a way to do their job safely. Get involved, make sure, get them the right tool, help them figure out how to do something safely. And that really also changed the tone. So I'm very pleased to say that just in a period of about 4 or 5 months, our recordable incident rate went down by a factor of 8. We went from the most unsafe site we had had really in our history to a very, very safe site, the best we had. I think other factors that were equally important were our attendance factor went up, our attrition went down. We believe the productivity improved. A story that's maybe resonates today was Harvey hit us. Harvey hit us quite hard. We were 97% complete and suddenly found ourselves with 4 feet of water across this whole plant. And the contractor said, you're going to be lucky to get half of your workforce back. You know, you've only got a few months left. The workers know it. There's plenty of work out there. Anybody with a truck can go fix houses and things. You know, brace yourselves, prepare yourselves for, you know, a decimation of your workforce. And after 17 days, it took us 17 days to clear the site of water, make it safe for people to walk on, and we had 98% of our workforce come back. They actually came back too quick. We weren't quite ready to have that many people, but and we know that some of the projects in the area actually did suffer from that they had less than half their workforce come back. So the culture that was created, you know, to address a safety problem, I think was a culture that people really liked. They would come up to me and want to, you know, how can I work here later? You know, let's keep going. It was really, in my career, one of the more remarkable recoveries, remarkable lessons in leadership that I've seen. And so, you know, CP Chem has taken this to heart. We're doing it in all our projects, we're in our turnarounds. You know, it's even a bit of an inspiration for our tagline that we released last year, which is performance by design, caring by choice, to reflect that you do need plans, you need procedures, you need processes that are well thought out, but you do have to pay attention to reaching the hearts and minds of your workforce, of your stakeholders, to really get where you want to go. So, I mentioned these projects are hard. They're hard to execute. We did learn some lessons in that. You know, per an industry consultant, 75% of projects over $1 billion, what we'd call a mega project, fail. And that definition of failure is either 25% over on cost, 25% over on schedule, or a year later, it's fundamentally not working, which is not a very, you know, high bar, actually, when you think about it. So we have to do better collectively as an industry to stay competitive. You can't overspend and then expect to compete globally in almost any business. So we're taking that to heart. I think we would start with, and we're starting our new projects with contractors that we can trust, you know, because you will have problems and you need to know that you're going to be able to resolve those problems and that you can work with them all the way up to the senior management level. And contractors that have some depth, at foreman, general foreman, superintendent, all the way up, experience in the U.S. Gulf Coast. I think it does help that this first wave of builds, both in petrochemicals and LNG, has created a lot more experience for folks, and we can use that momentum to do the next wave of projects. You know, of course, we would start a project by investing in our craft and look at that as our asset. So do the training of the craft, do the training of the general foreman and foreman, create that team atmosphere between the company and the contractors all the way down to that level, and spend that time and effort before you even start. The money is in the building, so really think about how you're going to build the project. These are extraordinarily complex. The cracker has over 1 million feet of pipe, so it's like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. You better figure out how things go, because if you get out of sequence, it's going to be hard to get back in, and you're going to be very non-productive and really actually risk unsafe things as you try to snake pipe into something. So design for constructability and stick to that plan, because it can be tempting to get progress, because you can see, hey, we could do this, but once you get out of sequence on a project that big, it really does domino on you. You know, so we believe we can take these principles and do our next projects, build on the success we had on the first one, and be even more successful. So I'd like to address, you know, what's happening in the Gulf Coast. Why is all this construction happening? You know, not only CP Chem built a cracker in polyethylene, but Exxon did, and Dow has, and Sasol and several others. So you look back, and the answer really does revolve around some experimenting George Mitchell did outside of Fort Worth in the late 90s on hydraulic fracturing that really hit in about 2009. And you can see it on this chart that natural gas price is in blue, crude price is in green. 2000 to 2009, on a BTU basis, they were about the same. You could see that actually when you look really close, natural gas was more expensive than crude on a BTU basis, and we had those spikes, those blue spikes. And then suddenly in 2009, that kind of started to change. And ever since then, we've enjoyed $3 gas, which was a big deal when you think about the recession that we had in 2008 and 2009. That really helped the United States recover more quickly, I think, than the rest of the world, and certainly brought down a lot of the costs of heating our homes and running our factories. So it is that gap between crude and gas that is driving this, because most of the rest of the world, Asia and Europe in particular, make these same products out of crude oil. So they're paying kind of off that green line where we can enjoy our feedstocks based on the blue line. So with all that natural gas development comes ethane. Ethylene crackers love ethane. And we can see that we've more than tripled our supply, or on the pace for more than tripling our supply of ethane. Because if you're going to invest $6 billion, you want to know that you're going to have feedstock for a long, long time. And that's what this brings. So there's really no other region in the world that has this right now. Even the Middle East, they've kind of run out of ethane. And so this is really the punchline at the end of the day. This is a cash cost curve. On the x-axis, we've got global ethylene capacity, kind of ranked by the cash cost. Cash cost to produce it is on the y-axis. And the Middle East and North America enjoy a very low cost of manufacture of ethylene, whereas the folks in West Europe, and North and Southeast Asia, will pay $300 a ton to $800 a ton more to make that same product than we will here. So for that, we can export it kind of anywhere in the world and be quite competitive. I guess I'd be remiss to skip a couple other points. One real advantage the Gulf Coast has, beyond this, is our network of pipelines and salt dome storage. No other place in the world really has this, and it gives us the opportunity to, if one of the units goes down, you can still run everything else because you can always get feedstock from somewhere. All the other complexes in the world generally don't have that. If the cracker goes down, you have to shut down the consuming units. If the consuming units go down, you have to shut down the cracker. If you don't have feedstock, you have to shut down everything. So in the U.S. Gulf Coast, if your unit's ready to operate and you want to operate it, you can always find feedstocks. And the last thing I'll mention is, if you recall that chart I just showed you on price, 2003, 2004, 2005, we were seeing $10 gas, $15 gas. The U.S. was the high-cost producer. We were shutting down plants. We were shutting down crackers. Remarkably, one of those crackers that was shut down 15 years ago is in the final phases of starting back up. So this is the advantage that we truly enjoy. So we've talked a lot about supply. Economists would say, well, you also need demand. So what's happening on the demand side of the equation? Let's address that a little bit. Really, it's all about the growth of the middle class. 200 million people a year are working their way from poverty and sustenance, to the lowest rungs of the middle class ladder. And this is a really good thing, because it means they're getting safe food, it means they're getting clean water, it means they're getting shelter, hygiene, basic transportation, things that we in this room just take for granted every single day, that are improving their quality of life, access to medical care. And when you think about it, a lot of that is driven by products that are made from petrochemicals, particularly plastics, facilitating hygienic food, clean water, medical, transportation. look a little bit more deeply, why is this happening? Why is there this big surge over the last 20, 30, 40 years? Well, the properties of plastics really can beat the properties of almost any other material in many applications. They're lighter, they're more durable. You can mold them into different shapes. You can make them in all kinds of different things. You can print on them. They're water and chemical resistant. When you think about milk jugs in the olden days that are glass, them breaking, how heavy they were, how expensive that would be to be transporting around to the grocery stores. The lightweight milk bottles make a big difference. The other applications include lightweighting cars for fuel savings, helping municipalities with polyethylene pipe that doesn't leak like the current many of the sewer and water pipes that we have around. And certainly next time you go in a hospital room, hopefully that's not soon, just look around at the materials they use and what it takes to maintain the hygiene and sanitation that you need in a hospital. So that's a bit of the background. And really, when you look back to the late 60s, and it kind of, for those of you my age in this room, you may remember the movie The Graduate. I can say Mrs. Robinson was right when she told Dustin Hoffman to go into plastics, because ever since she said that, we've grown at 4 to 5% a year for about 45 or 50 years. So she was quite clairvoyant. But at that same time, this sort of boom in plastics has really highlighted another challenge we face. And it's a very, very deep challenge that really has our attention and has the world's attention. And you can see it on TV, you can see it in the newspapers every single day. The pictures of the floating islands of plastic that are out in the Pacific. Those are hard to look at. I can assure you, when we design our products and think about these things, that's not what we have in mind. That's not what the design basis was, and that's not where they're supposed to be. And we need to do something about it. And it starts with waste. 90% of what's in the ocean comes from 10 rivers in Asia and Africa. And so we need to get it at the source. And it's all waste. The problem with plastic is that it floats, so you do see it. So we're the visible ones, but they have very much a waste handling problem along these stretches of these rivers. And as we continue to grow the middle class, most of that middle class and most of the people coming out of poverty are frankly in those regions of Asia and Africa that are the biggest problem. And so shortly I'll talk to you about what we're doing on that. But first, many people react to those visuals. And let me also say that even though in the US and Europe, we have very good solid waste management systems, we have good companies that handle it, ultimately you don't want it in the landfill either. These products have value, and that's what we want to capture. So step one, obviously get it out of the ocean and get it out of the environment where it shouldn't be. But step two is let's get it out of the landfills as well, because we don't want to have, no one wants those in their backyard, and there's value in this material. So in 2014, the United Nations Environmental Program hired a think tank, a company that does analysis, and asked them the question, tell us what the annual environmental cost to the environment is due to plastics. And so they have all these algorithms and bases and assumptions to look at it from the very beginning of the chain, when you're getting the hydrocarbon out of the ground, all the way through production, manufacture, transportation, consumption, and end of cycle. And they came up with a staggering figure of $139 billion. And that started to raise the awareness of a lot of the NGOs and kind of put plastics as an evil thing. 2 years later, the American Chemistry Council went back to True Cost and said, hey, using that same methodology, using those same assumptions, using those same algorithms, tell us what the cost is of the alternative to plastic. And so they took that on, And much to their own surprise, they came up with $533 billion for the alternatives to plastic, 3.4 times higher. And so kind of on their own, it occurred to them that maybe the thing you shouldn't do is jump to the higher cost alternative, but figure out how to work down the lower cost alternative, which was in this case a plastic solution. And they felt very quickly you could lower that cost from 139 billion to 98 by looking at every step of the way and trying to optimize and trying to minimize the environmental footprint of everything that was done. And so, they came up with quite a list of things that we could all do. In many cases, the petrochemical industry and the oil and gas industry, transportation industry has embraced these things because, we're all citizens and we want to make this work. So CP Chem has embraced this, and I would appeal to each and every one of you that and we can all do our own part personally, to reduce the impact of the environment. Frankly, if you don't need a straw, don't take a straw. But if you need a straw, I would say that my personal experience, and this is even Kamala Harris agrees with me on this, is paper straws are really difficult to use. So you can use a plastic straw if you need it. Ideally, recycle that plastic straw. If not, at least dispose of it responsibly. But we can all do our part because everything we touch, whether it's plastic or anything else, comes with an environmental footprint that can be measured by a company like TrueCost. So we waste a lot of stuff. We need to be more cognizant of it. We can maintain our standard of living without some of these bells and whistles, and some of the things we just sort of take intuitively, knowing we'll probably not use it. So, what we're after, this is really what TrueCost came to the same conclusion of we really need to, and we have the possibility, because plastics are so recyclable in most cases, to create a circular economy. And this is what CP Chem is embracing. We're doing things like working with our customers to lightweight, to make our plastic stronger so we can lightweight stuff. A picture I showed earlier was of a kayak. We have a customer that makes kayaks. We're working with them on how to make the kayak lighter, but just as strong, if not stronger. And if you own one, and if you've ever carried one around, you can appreciate that, at least that will, help your environment a bit and maybe help out your back if we can, when we do that. We're also working with customers on making our products more recyclable. Certain things are less recyclable. The multi-layer things with lots of different materials, become a bit problematic to recycle. So if we can find solutions to that and still meet the consumer need, that's what we're trying to do. I mentioned that we built a very, very efficient, if not the most efficient in the world, ethylene cracker. And we're looking at solar power, for our facilities. Most people think if you're in the petrochemical business, you'd be against recycling because that would hurt new product demand. And I think in the industry, I can assure you we look at that differently because, we do need to address this problem. We do see value in it, and we want recycling, or else that can snuff us out. We're also members of a global society. And care about these things. And actually, honestly, because we feel so strongly in the better environmental footprint for our products, if we can solve this problem, we can actually gain new markets and new applications. So it'll come as a surprise that the American Chemistry Council has 3 sustainability goals. First is by 2030 that 100% of all plastics packaging is recyclable or recoverable. And by 2040, we're actually recycling, recovering, and reusing 100% of all plastics. So I hope you see that as a commitment from our industry to address this problem. The third one is all ACC members will be members of Operation Clean Sweep Blue, which is a program to keep the pellets, and the polyethylene and most plastics come in little pellets, may look like rice, inside our plants and well contained. In other places of the world in particular, that's a pretty pressing problem. It's not so much in the US. We've been a member of Operation Clean Sweep for many, many years. All of our plant sites are all over this. Part of our sustainability reporting is to report our releases. And last year, our release of pellets was a total of 4 pounds. What the real answer is somewhat highlighted in the circle here. Mechanical recycling is where you leave the polymer really in polymer form. You might grind it up, you might melt it, but it still stays a polymer and you can reuse it in some other form or fashion. And in cases where the stream is rather clean, the stream is well sorted, it can really work. Remarkably, in a few minutes I'll show a video of India. The pictures are kind of jarring, but they actually lead the world in PET recycling. 75% of PET, so your water bottles in India, get recycled. The leading seller of pillows and linens and even high fashion fabrics in India is a company called Reliance, and all that comes from recycled PET. And I haven't ever slept on one of their pillows, but they claim they're softer than cotton. So it can be done. It can be done even in some of the more dire of circumstances. But you do need clean streams. You do need well segregated streams. In the US, with our collection bins, we tend not to clean the stuff up very well. We tend not to sort it well. We tend to put stuff in that shouldn't be in, quite honestly. We don't look at the little top of the garbage can as well as we should. And that leads to the other solution of chemical recycling, where you take probably dirtier streams, less segregated streams, with a lot of heat, a process called pyrolysis for the engineers. You can basically turn it back into a liquid hydrocarbon, a diesel fuel if you want. So and you can do that on a mass basis. And then you have a feedstock for a refinery or a chemical plant, and it's a little bit of a bigger loop, but it's a loop nonetheless in terms of reusing everything. So there's more information on our website. I'll give a little shout out to the cpchem.com website and the Plastics and You thing to click on, I guess, whatever that is. Another initiative I'd like to make people familiar with is relatively new in the last year and a half, Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And this is a pretty amazing deal, if you will. Right now we're at 42 companies, international, huge companies, you can see their logos, that are very committed to ending plastic waste and making some of these things I just spoke about happen and scale up and happen on a mass level. You can see the commitment of $1 billion, and we're on our way to $1.5 billion. And we'll be working with governments, and we'll be working with NGOs and various entrepreneurs on various solutions with an eye to doing it at the source, keeping it out of the rivers in the first place, managing solid waste, giving people options besides just piling it up and letting the rainwater, wash it away. And I think what's most impressive to me, because I've witnessed it, is this is being led by the CEOs of these companies. They have put a lot of work into it. CEOs are pretty busy, and I know people may have some cartoon images, or TV conveys the image of chemical company CEOs in the back room, plotting on how to, make money and, pollute the earth. That's not what these guys are doing. They're spending a lot of time on this, and that gives me confidence it's going to work because of the commitment level that these companies are making to this program. And so there's several initial programs that we're doing. They're all kind of in early stages because this is just happening in the last year. One of them will be to adopt the island of Bali in Indonesia and work with them on solid waste handling. There's a city, by China standards, a medium-sized city of 3.5 million people that we'll be partnering with to help on that same topic to get the plastics out of the river, give them solutions for solid waste management that are sustainable, and make sure that part of the solution on plastics is to start this circular economy. One of the projects I'm going to show a little video of is being led by an entrepreneur, and she created a company about 8 or 10 years ago. A remarkable woman of Indian descent, grew up in Australia, came to MIT, came to Stanford, created her own technology for pyrolysis, proved it, has scaled it up, so she's handling plastic waste in Salt Lake City and Boise and turning that into diesel fuel for the municipal vehicles of Salt Lake City. And so she's taking that back to India, and she's targeted the Ganges River for cleanup, and she'll be bringing one of these pyrolysis units over and turning that waste that's in the Ganges River into fuel. But she doesn't just stop there. Her effort includes education, includes changing the process, changing the behaviors, trying to improve the lot of the garbage pickers in India who provide the source of her feedstock. So I'd like to share a little bit of an introductory video about this remarkable woman.
The Ganges is of huge cultural and spiritual importance to the Hindu community. We're actually at the epicenter of the plastic pollution crisis.
My name is Priyanka Bakaya, and I'm the founder and director for New Oceans.
So our focus is on the river. So if we're able to prevent the plastics from entering the rivers to begin with, that means that they won't enter into the oceans.
There's a few innovative things that we're doing which have never been done before. We call it the 3 C's, where it's collection, conversion, and then community.
It really comes down to a combination of the technology to be able to solve these issues. We need to empower people so that they can feel part of the solution. That's the only way we're going to be able to address these huge challenges facing our planet.
Okay, because she came and spoke at a leadership conference we had internally on Tuesday, and her update is pretty remarkable. They do have the booms in the river, so they're able to collect and divert the plastics. They don't have the pyrolysis machine quite up and running, but they've created nice conditions for the people that are picking the garbage out. They are recovering the rigid plastic, the bottles and things, because there is a ready home in India for that. And hopefully by the end of the year, they'll be up and running with pyrolysis and be able to take any kind of plastic, the films and the other things that aren't quite as readily mechanically recyclable, but quite an inspiring woman. So to conclude, our challenge is, how do we improve, how do we maintain our standard of living all around the world? How do we improve it? How do we still continue to get people out of poverty who need these things as the things we kind of take for granted, and still manage our environment, address the environmental challenges that's created. Several years ago when I worked in Port Arthur, had the opportunity to work for one of the greatest leaders and was really helpful for my career. And he really emphasized to look for and solutions. Don't think narrowly, think broadly. And that's what we're going to have to do, because we're going to have to make sure any solution is environmentally sound. We're going to have to make sure it's safe, hygienic, and we're going to have to make sure it's actually affordable, or else it's not really a solution if people can't afford it. We'll be turning that cycle backwards in terms of our standard of living. So these are the challenges that we have. I would say another challenge, and I'm sure it's being addressed in other sessions here, is our workforce. Things are getting more and more complex. These and solutions of solving multiple problems at once and solving problems without creating other ones are hard to do. And so investing in our workforce, just like I told you we had to do for our project, is critical. Our units are getting more and more complicated. We have to run them safe and environmentally sound every single day. And so, developing a skilled workforce is paramount. And certainly operating in an era of kind of unsettled politics, of trade uncertainty is another kind of new twist on the game that we face as we look for these global solutions. So when I speak to student groups, I do emphasize the need to think critically and look for these and solutions. And I basically apologize to them for these problems that my generation has left for them to solve. I do highlight that we've given them some tools, maybe better tools than I had. I was just a few years away from having to go through college with a slide rule. Luckily, they did come out with calculators. But now when you think about it, we have more technology in our pockets, in our purses, than NASA did to land a man on the moon. So it can be done, but it will take that combination of technology and inspired leader like Priyanka with a vision to solve and problems, not look for maybe the most politically expedient solution or whatever, but to really solve the problems so that we can maintain our standard of living. We can bring people out of poverty. We can make lives better all over the world, and we can protect our environment, because that's really part of the standard of living when you really get down to it. So I really appreciate the chance to tell our story this morning, and again, remind you, check the weather on the way home, make a good risk management decision on how you're going to do that, that safety really does come first. So thank you.